Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. As the new year comes around with the winter solstice and we are besieged with storm after storm here in the UK, it seems fitting that we should bring in the new year with some of the reports we have that have taken place in snowy conditions. So as the storm rages outside and I'm tucked up warm in bed, let's get comfortable and I'll share some tales with you from across the globe. I had an email sent to me this month from a gentleman who asked me if I'd be interested in viewing a strange set of tracks that were found in frozen ground that had been taken when he was on a mountain walk in the UK many years ago. I said, yes, of course, I'd be excited to see them, and I'll share them with you all with the full report as soon as I can. But he got me thinking about how many other strange prints have been sent or reported to me over the years that have been found in snowy or icy conditions. And it's a lot, but I've whittled them down and we're going to have a look across the globe at some of them that I have. Now, our first report tonight takes us to the Alps, to the small town of Tyrol in Western Austria. And this was shared with me several years ago now from a lady who was making the report on behalf of herself and her husband. This happened in 1983, and she said, back in 83, my ex-husband and I were stationed in Germany with the RAF. They hired holiday homes for service personnel to have cheap getaways, one of those homes being in Tyrol, in Austria. And as we were keen skiers at the time, we chose to be up on the mountain. There's a hotel which was closed when we stayed. It must have been around Christmas time, but on its grounds of the hotel there were 5 caravans. The place was totally deserted, so we were the only people staying there. From what I can remember, we had the forest behind us and the valley in front of us with the view of other mountains. We'd spent the day skiing and had one of those Instamatic cameras. I wore glasses then, and the night we were looking at the pictures we'd taken, there was one of me where the light had bounced off my glasses, making it look like my eyes were glowing. I remarked that I looked like an abominable snowman on skis, which got us on the subject of the Yeti. And as we were eating dinner, being about 19-year-old at the time, we had a silly conversation of what we'd do if a Yeti put its hand through the window and grabbed our beans on toast. My husband said he'd stab it with his plastic fork, etc. After an uneventful night, we got up the next morning and opened the door. And there, in the snow, were large footprints. Definitely not human, as they were too wide. The footprints led from the woods behind us, and then they circled the caravan at least twice, and they stopped by various windows as if they were looking in, and then they went back to the woods. Now, we did take a photograph, but this has been lost due to moving many times since then. And to be honest, we didn't take it seriously at the time. I was convinced it was probably a caretaker at the hotel having a joke, although we'd not seen anyone in the time spent there. We were leaving that day, so we didn't bother looking into it further. If it had been today, I'd be taking it very seriously. Talk about a missed opportunity. She said, looking at Google Maps, I think it was the Interlaken Hotel, as I remember it had a swimming pool, and it was frozen at the time, and the building looks very similar to where we stayed. Sadly, as our witness said, she didn't realise the importance of the prints at the time, or even the fact that a whole track had been seen, which would show us really movement, width of stride. You can get a lot of information from a track of prints rather than just one singular one. As they say, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Now, one question I'm often asked is if cryptids leave a 3-toed print. And I've had a number of photographs sent to me from all across the globe that show what I would describe almost like a dog print with an elongated heel. And I've added some cases that discuss just that. A strange 3-toed print often found in snow. In the blog Paranormal Witness, there's a report which mentions a strange 3-toed print, and the man who found it said, one of my earliest paranormal type experiences was finding a very distinct 3-toed footprint in the soft dirt as a child. To give you some backstory, I grew up on 640 acres in North Idaho. I knew the area well, and I wandered the woods and roads through it all the time. So I was used to all of the normal footprints that you'd find out there, creatures, wildlife, so on. But one day, on my walk between the houses, their homes were about a mile apart. I found in the middle of the road, in the soft dirt between the tyre tracks, a perfectly stamped three-toed footprint. The outline was clean and smooth. Each toe came to a sharp point, and the heel was perfectly rounded. The whole of it was 10 inches long. In short, it was nothing like I'd ever seen, and I was unable to find any more of them in the area. If I'd been anywhere else, I would have assumed someone was messing with me. But out there, there's no one to do that. There's no one that would have been around that would have walked in that exact spot. A few months later, I found a second print with the same exact shape, but smaller, in the mud again, and this was in the driveway near the house. I could only find one, seemingly as if someone had dropped down, set one foot on the ground, and then left. To this day, I have found no reports of anything like this out there. A few pictures have come close, but nothing has been an exact match to what I saw. Now, our next case takes place in the UK, but the prints found by the boys seem very, very similar to the print that this gentleman found in Idaho. Our witness said, "This happened a long time ago now, Deb, 1980s, but I've never forgotten it. It's still as clear now as it was then. I was in a group of 5 lads and we were walking in the fields. At the end of Church Lane, there's a woodland that you can see on the map. There's a new track there now that leads through the woods, but back then we followed the old path, which ran right next to the field, and you can still see that on Google Earth. We'd all got walkie-talkies for Christmas that year, and we were out in the fields using them. We split up across the field and moved closer to Tad Brook, testing the capabilities. There was snow on the ground. It was between Christmas and New Year. We jumped across the brook, and on landing we found some strange prints in the snow. They had a square heel and what looked like 3 toes. The prints were really weird. They weren't huge. I wore a size 9 at the time. I placed my Doc Martin boot next to the prints, and although it wasn't as long as my foot, it was twice as wide. We were really puzzled as to what could have left marks like this. In hindsight, I can't see someone out in the fields leaving strange footprints for boys to find in the snow. The prints were very strange. But what amazed us the most was the length of the stride between the prints. The stride was huge, and we all tried to match it, but we couldn't. They were in a field, in front of us, right there, and there was a hedge separating the 2 fields. Whatever left those prints had jumped that hedge. On one side of the hedge, there were 2 prints, side by side, and in front of the prints, there were distinct claw marks in the mud and snow, as if the jumper had used their hands when they landed. We followed the footprints across the field into the next one, and they were all trodden on by cows, and we couldn't follow them anymore. By this point, it was starting to go dark, and the temperature dropped. The fields began to become foggy. We could hear dogs barking in the farm beyond the fields, and that was our escape route. But the idea of running into farm dogs was not welcome, and we didn't want to go back the way we came, as the prints had spooked us all out. So we volunteered my brother, who was the oldest, to run across the small footbridge and see, if he was safe, then we'd all make our way across. We skirted the woods and the fields as we set off home for the village, and we made a plan to go back the next day with my mates Alsatian and cameras if we could, and look for the maker and photograph those strange prints. And of course, it snowed all night, so the next day that put paid to that idea. Now, we could only guess what the prints looked like, as the boys did not have the means to photograph the prints. Now, we crossed the pond and go to the United States, and a tale of some very strange prints over there. And this happened in West Virginia, 2011. And the gentleman in this case is called Chris, and he said, 2 years ago, just a month after becoming the only person left living up on the mountain of our family farm, I was hiking down the road after it had snowed, and I found what looked like a human footprint in the snow, only it had 3 toes. In the days prior to this, I'd been watching animal prints that seemed to be tracking me home after parking my car down the dirt road towards the highway and hiking home so it didn't get snowed in. The prints looked like some large animal had been around the car. Now, we have large packs of coyotes, bears, and mountain lions here, and in the past 2 years, they've started coming onto the yard and attacking my animals. But these prints are not something I've seen before. It was while I was following animal tracks that I noticed a print probably 20 feet from my door, right in the middle of the road. I'd walked right by there the day before and it was not there then. There was only one print though. I've never seen anything like that before. Isn't it strange we often hear talk of one print, singular, like the other chap said, almost as if someone's fell from the sky and landed on one foot and then disappeared into oblivion, I suppose. And it makes me think of the very famous case in England of the devil-like footprints. Our next case takes us back to the UK and the well-known city of Liverpool, and the case of the devil-like footprints and the strange carcass of a dog found up in a tree. Now, the case was written by a journalist who writes for the Liverpool Echo, and he said, "I'm the reporter for this newspaper, and a few nights ago, on Wednesday the 23rd of December 2009, I trudged through ankle-deep snow in Calderstones Park with Mr. Alan Willis of Menlove Avenue. He's a 60-year-old man who discovered a curious mystery while walking his dog. Mr. Willis noticed a trail of what looked like hoof prints imprinted in the virgin snow of the park. Those prints leading from the 1,000-year-old Allerton Oak and continuing across the ivory blanketed green towards the lake. Whatever left the prints seemed to have a cloven foot, and it seemed that it walked in a complete straight line with an unusually large stride of about 13 inches. This mysterious animal seems to be aquatic and unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures, because the trail continued on the other side of the park and vanished in the lake towards Yew Tree Road. The trail must have been made about 9:45 in the evening, because there was only a thin crust of frozen snow up there at the time. Heavy snow fell later, after a window of time, and the creature with a peculiar straight gait must have covered a substantial distance within a very short time, unless it's invisible. For I interviewed several dog walkers who'd been in the vicinity of the trail, and they saw nothing. But one woman, walking her terrier, said her dog acted very strangely around that time. It was cowering and looking with a tilted head at something in the direction of the old Calderstone Oak. The dog let out a yelp and tugged on its leash for the park exit. Couldn't get out there quick enough. Now, badgers sometimes leave V-shaped prints, he said, but there are no badgers in Calderstone Park. And foxes leave paw prints, quite distinctive. Perhaps someone out there can throw light on this seasonal mystery. No. An identical trail of baffling prints was seen in Liverpool in the aftermath of the Great Snowstorm in 1866. The blizzard was so severe in January of that year that the telegraph lines were blown down and all communication was lost with the rest of the country for a week. Several people walked from the landing stage to Birkenhead across the frozen Mersey, but most huddled indoors to escape the chill, and Liverpool resembled a deserted ghost town. In the fresh virgin snow, Great St. George Street, a diligent policeman on his beat noticed a trail of hoof prints that struck him as being very odd, because the animal that had made them must have put one foot exactly in front of the other and walked in a precise straight line. The policeman walked alongside the tracks for miles and saw that nothing stopped or hindered them, because at one point they went up a wall near Renshaw Street and crossed a snow-covered roof on Oldham Street, and at another point on Scotland Road the weird prints came to a sudden end, as if the unknown animal had just taken off at that point. Now, the devil traditionally has cloven feet and was blamed for the trail, and as more people saw the marks of Satan's hooves, the rumours grew to fever pitch, and many of the churches of Liverpool were packed for weeks with terrified parishioners suffering with satanic panic. Frustratingly, there are no images facts to the newspaper report, and I can't find them online anywhere, so I can't share them with you. But they are not the only time the devil has danced in the snow as all around him sleeps, aided by the stillness of the night. Unexplained footprints in the snow might have been left by the devil in 1855, and those footprints travelled over 100 miles through South Devonshire in a single night, leaving its mysterious hoof marks in the newly fallen snow. The prints were of a kind never seen before, and hundreds of people were witness to them. Some of them superstitious folk who believed the owner of the feet to be Satan himself. Others, studied the footmarks seriously and soberly scratched their heads, put forward all manner of theories, not one of which made sense. The footprints were roughly 4 inches long and 2 inches across, shaped not unlike a donkey's shoe, although sometimes appearing to be more distinctly cloven. The track was in a continuous straight line, each print being exactly 8 inches from the next, and neither to the left nor the right. Whatever it was seemed to be two-legged. No man walks with feet in a straight line. No man's cloven-footed or shoed like a donkey. Maybe it was some bird, perhaps, it was suggested, that may have made the prints. But what bird could walk 100 miles in 14 hours of darkness? What bird walks at all without ever taking to the wind? The emu, an ostrich, with the emus and ostriches running around in Devon in the countryside in 1850s, later on in Liverpool about 150 years later. I highly doubt that. But it would all happen again. An ancient legend involving a visit to Devon by Satan has been reawakened after a great-grandmother discovered a mysterious set of footprints in her snow-laden back garden in Wolseley in Devon. In March of 2009, Jill Wade was perplexed to find pointed hoof-like marks in the fresh snow at her home. The marks are similar to those in the original case, which have been shrouded in mystery for over 150 years. Miss Wade, a retired local government officer, awoke and looked out of a bedroom window to see the eerie footprints stretching across her garden. She said the footprints stretched 60 to 70 feet across the lawn in an arch shape, running from below her window to the other side of the garden. And she said, I looked in the garden and it really intrigued me. It was a complete blanket of snow, and there were no other marks out there at all. I cannot believe what I saw, as the footprints were left by something cloven hooved. At least this time she had the sense to take a photograph of them. If you're listening to this on the podcast and you want to see that photograph, there's a link to the website where I've run an article on it. Now, in our next report, we have scant description of the prints found by the Shepard. Reading between the lines, I think she's describing a human-shaped footprint that was larger than her own and was left by something she couldn't see. And it happened in 1988 in Crossfell. Now, Cumbria is an area where a shepherd experienced some kind of very unusual event whilst looking for lost sheep on the summit of Crossfell in 1988. She tells the following story in a letter to Bufra and talks about ramblers in the area who'd reported unusual anomalies, strange feelings which caused them to feel apprehensive and uncomfortable and glad to return home after dark. The shepherd concerned had been out with a partner searching for some sheep that had gone astray. It was winter and there was a great deal of snow. They agreed to separate and go in different directions to search for the sheep. And as she and her partner separated, she came across an unusual set of footprints. She said, the dogs and I sat on the summit rocks to eat sandwiches and have a well-earned rest when suddenly there was a violent swishing, rumbling sound. Looking back over the summit ridge itself towards the Dunfell radar beacon, there was a peculiar cloud, or a disk, which seemed to hover for a second, then it disappeared down Eden Valley. I decided to retrace my steps down off the summit and continued looking for the sheep at a lower level, when the second weird event occurred. Not only were there my tracks and those of my 2 collies, but now there were 2 more alongside them, of a much larger size and a far deeper tread. No one could possibly have made them in that short time that I turned to observe the strange cloud. My way up was at all other times in view from where I'd been sitting. I should have seen what left those footprints. And one of my collies started to sniff at the same tracks. Now, we have to wonder if the tracks in the snow and the strange craft are related. At a height of 848 metres, Great Dunfell is the second highest mountain in England's Pennine mountain range. Lies about 2 miles south along the watershed from Crossfell, its higher neighbour. Now, it's beautiful, vast and foreboding all at the same time. Now, we go to another mountain range, this time in Scotland, and the beauty of the county of Perthshire. Strange tracks were found in Glenorchy, Scotland on the 14th of March 1984. The Times of London printed an odd news story that they had gotten from the Perth Courier. According to the report, tracks that appeared to be made by a large animal had been encountered in the high mountainous snow area where Glenorchy and Glenlyon all meet, with the tracks being reported off and on in several places within a 12-mile range. The tracks had been discovered several times in the winters of 1840 and also in 1839, but they'd never been followed. The tracks looked like prints made by a foal of considerable size, except that the sole seemed a little longer and not as round. And from the depth to which the tracks are sunk into the snow, it's believed the overall animal was very large, but the beast itself had never been reportedly seen. It was also reported that the tracks did not display the usual walk of a quadruped, but more like the bounding or the leaping of a hare. Another set of strange tracks were found by a man in the Medway area when he was out with his dog, and that was reported to BBR many years ago now. It was 2013, and he said, "Around 10 years ago in winter, I was out very early one morning walking my dog before I set out for work about 5:45. I took her on our usual route, which takes us to a large field and on the edge of a massive urban development. We're surrounded by countryside for several miles in all directions. Where we walk, it's a moderate-sized wood above the River Medway. It'd been snowing heavily during the night, and it was cold as the temperature was well below freezing, and it was dark still, with it being December and all. We came to the field where we usually do a circuit, which is hemmed in by a large housing estate. I got about halfway round when I saw in the torchlight, coming from my right-hand side, a set of footprints in the snow that looked like they'd been left by someone with bare feet. The snow was still pristine and virgin, apart from the usual rabbit and fox tracks. The footprints continued across the field, moving from right to left, and now my dog was sniffing them and showing an unusual interest, and she was casting about, going a little mental, to be honest. The really strange bit is that the footprint started on the edge of a massive barricade of brambles, and there were no signs of any pathways apart from a small, maybe fox or rabbit run. No snow looked to have been knocked off the top of the bramble thicket. It wasn't disturbed in any way, and there were no other human footprints save mine. I followed the very clear trail across the width of the field. I'm 6'5", size 13 feet. These prints looked a little bigger than mine, say 13 and a half, 14, something like that. I tried to copy the stride, which was roughly equal to my own. The prints were broader and very deep, and had obviously been left by a bare foot, with the shape of the toes being quite obvious. The prints then went down on the snow-covered rubbish slope that is an entrance to Baidu's wood. My dog was still acting very excitable, and following a scent she found different. I took stock, and I followed the trail about 20 feet into the woods, where it became impossible to pick up the tracks anymore. Now, the problem I have with those footprints is all, the size of them, and the stride of the footsteps. They were outside of human range. It would have to be someone tall like me, but not outlandish, I suppose. But why would someone try walking across a snow-covered field barefoot and leave no trail leading up to the tracks? Like I said, it's an impenetrable barrier of thorns and brambles backing onto the housing estate. The trail started from the right of the copse in the middle, and then it skirted around it into the woods on the left. Like I said, they just sort of started on the edge of the field with no sign of disturbance. How often do we hear that impression? Prints that randomly start in the middle of a snowy field. It suggests a creature that's manifesting in that spot. And it's something that is mentioned many times in cryptid and paranormal experiences. Peter Denham may just be one man who experienced the creature for himself and lived to tell the tale. Peter Denham is a local forester and a climbing enthusiast. He has lots of experience in the Cairngorms. And he decided in 1945 one day to climb Ben Macdhu, which he accomplished, and he arrived at the summit cairn around noon. It was a clear, bright day, and the panorama from Britain's second highest mountain was breathtaking. However, the mist soon descended, and Peter decided to finish off his lunch at the cairn, then make his way back down the slopes. Knowing the hill well, Peter was in no way disturbed by the mist and poor visibility. Setting off on his route, he soon heard the familiar crunch of feet on the plateau behind him. At first he was intrigued rather than afraid, and he set off to investigate, thinking of the grey man and the paranoia of others. As Peter got closer, he too was suddenly overcome by a sense of foreboding, and his desire to flee the mountain became intense. Without even thinking, instinct took over, and he was soon running hell for leather in the valley below, barely missing the steep cliffs of Lurchers Crag. Peter was left shaken and utterly convinced that something unnatural stalked the mountains. There are many reports up there of hikers and walkers and mountaineers who hear something approaching them or approaching their camp, but it's never seen. Many years ago, when BBR was still using the name British Bigfoot Research, we received a report from a man in the US who'd served here at one of the many army bases in Yorkshire. He had a tale to tell after visiting one of the local farms. And he said, "Hello everyone. Adam Bird asked me to relate my experience to you, so you can add the information to your data and hopefully help me find the farm. First, let me say that I've been a researcher of the American Sasquatch since 1963, and I'm an admin for several Bigfoot groups. However, that should have no bearing on my credibility in writing this account. In the late 1960s, I was stationed for a short time in the UK at an RAF USAF base. I became friends with one of the RAF personnel who had parents living in the north of England in Yorkshire. One night, in a pub over more than a few pints, I related to him my first Class A sighting of a Sasquatch in Michigan in 1963. And he immediately told me his parents had seen very large footprints, about 18 inches in length, on their property, and he invited me to come home with him during a long weekend. His parents lived on a very large, heavily wooded piece of property west of the city of York. The driveway to the house was more than 500 metres long, and the house itself could not be seen from the road. There were very thick woods on both sides of the drive that made the area dark even during the daytime. Though the house was not large, I guess you'd call these folks gentry. If you closed your eyes, you could imagine Robin Hood standing in the tree line. Getting back onto topic. At dinner, the first night, my friend told his parents that I'd researched the Bigfoot Sasquatch in the US, and at this dinner was the first time I'd heard them use the term woodwose. Both my friend and his parents were firm believers because of the huge tracks they occasionally found in the snow, some of which even coming up to the windows of the home. Their gardener even complained that something had once torn several shrubs out of the ground and threw them across the yard. All of them believed this animal was harmless and had no fear of it. However, they said the dogs often acted strangely, leaving them to believe that the animal was close by, and the dogs did fear that. Adam and I, he said, discussed this quite a while ago, and I wanted to run a search to try and find them to make sure my facts are straight, but I had no luck. If the parents are not deceased, they would be well into their 80s and 90s by now. I believe their names were Herbert and Emma Bentwell, or Bentwall. If any of your members know of them or can find them, I would appreciate hearing about it. I'll say those names again for you, because you just never know, do you? It would be Herbert and Emma Bentwell, or Bentwall, and they lived west of York City, which what sounds like, I would imagine, a Georgian home. Now, it would be awesome if we could identify the property owned by the family, and if the names ring a bell, will you please get in touch? Now, let's go to Sweden and the area of Voxna, where a lady who has no clue about cryptids reported a strange set of footprints left in the snow at her cabin. This took place in 1984. The report says a local woman who wants to remain anonymous went out to a recreation area at Voxna to clean their family cabin for the waiting summer. After a short while, she suddenly heard what she described as pretty heavy feet moving around the property outside. She sensed that this was not your ordinary intruder, and actually was so frightened she hid under the bed. She said, "I was so unnerved. I never saw the creature, but it was a creature. And when 1 hour had passed, I got up and I went outside and I found giant footprints in the garden around the house." She stated that these footprints measured 45 centimetres in length and some 30 centimetres wide. There were plenty of them too, but she had no knowledge of making plaster casts. She didn't even consider that an option, as the Swedish Bigfoot had never come up for her before. Now, something to note is that there are 3 Swedish Bigfoot reports that encircle this property, all from witnesses who don't know each other, all reported at different times. So this could suggest a possible route, maybe, or a long-term area for the Swedish forest folk. We started tonight's podcast with a case from the mountains of Tyrol. So let's finish on another European report, this time a report that came in from Belgium, where once again we hear of the mysterious devil footprints. Now, this happened in 1945, in January of that year, at 10 a.m. to be frank. Eric Frank Russell was one of a number of people who discovered strange prints in the snow on a hill behind a chateau in Everberg, Belgium. Each print was only 2.5 inches long by 1.5 inches wide and formed a single file line with no left or right variance, as if the creature had been hopping or walking one foot in front of the other. The prints were in distinct pairs of 2 prints about 9 inches apart. These pairs were then separated from each other by a varying distance of 12 to 15 inches. This odd line of prints was followed by Russell for about a half-mile in a northwesterly direction until they abruptly vanished, shortly after entering a tiny wood. Russell then traced them back in the south direction for about 2 miles across the field and a stream until he reached a hillside on which they were, worn away by the wind-blown snow. The crest of the hill and the side opposite, which was sheltered from the wind, did not have any further tracks, so whatever left them vanished from the hill. The oddest part of the trail was that Russell struggled through snow between 2 to 4 feet deep to follow it, yet he saw no sign of what left those prints behind. Russell stated that, judging by their depth, whatever made them was at least the weight of a good medium-sized creature, such as an Airedale. But if it was an animal walking, signs of its body should have been evident in the deep snow. The prints remained visible for 2 days, thanks to good weather. Russell questioned a number of locals about it, but they'd not seen such a thing before either. Sadly, no film was available in the area, no photographs were taken. Now, while Russell speculated the tracks might have somehow been caused by a goat, being that the area was littered with them, he didn't find the thought very convincing. All in all, Russell couldn't help but compare the tracks he saw to the more famous occurrence of the strange tracks that appeared in Devon, in England, in 1855. Though in Russell's case, the tracks didn't stretch anywhere near as far, nor climb to roofs of houses. So tonight, when you close the curtains or shutters and the snow falls softly, think about waking up in the night to the sound of something padding around outside. Maybe you'll be my next witness to a set of footprints in the snow. And if you are, get your phone out, take a photograph of them. And if you can't do that because you haven't got a phone, draw them. Go inside and jot them down so you've got an idea of when you're trying to explain it later on of what you've seen. But as I said earlier, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Next week, I will bring you an update on the Aviemore report that was shared with us by Jane, who was staying at the Dalroddy campground when something foreboding walked up to the tent that she and her friend were staying in. It worried Jane so much, she felt that this night could be her last. In a strange serendipity, Jane's husband Tom had his own experience there many years later. I will bring you more on this case in our first podcast of 2024. I would like to wish you all a wonderful new year. Hogmanay, Bloyd and Nui, Avlain, and from my home to yours, may your heart be warm and your pockets be full. Good night, everyone.